Writer's block sucks, but a little early prep work goes a long way when it comes to the war against it. I'm a big fan of breaking big tasks down into smaller ones, or baby steps.
Baby steps.
I'm Nathan Graham Davis. I'm a Hollywood screenwriter living in Massachusetts, and if this is the first video you've seen from this series, then congratulations, you have stumbled across a one-of-a-kind 15-week screenwriting course. And it's completely 100% free. I've made my living as a screenwriter for a couple years now, and I got there largely because of the help of other writers, so this is me paying it forward. If you want to know more, go check out Class 0, where you can find out if this is for you. To those of you following along, you've made it to week 5. You've been putting some real work in, and you're already about a third of the way through, which means that despite having not written a single page of it, you're about a third of the way to having the first draft of your feature screenplay done. Last week, in addition to reading The Task by Terry Rossio and reading a screenplay with one of your favorite all-time characters, you chose the concept for your screenplay and began researching it. Hopefully you're enjoying that process. It's always a super energizing time for me when I can kind of slowly begin to think, oh yeah, maybe I can build a movie out of this idea. Today, we're going to talk about how to build on that feeling even more so that you can really begin to discern what the shape of this film will be. Your biggest assignment for this week will be to write a one-pager for your script. A one-pager is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a one-page summary of your script, and there are lots of ways to write one. But I like to approach them kind of like a movie trailer. So that's what we're going to do. You may have seen that I have another video on my channel that talks about one-pagers, and if you've already watched it, that's fine. But today we're going to go even more into detail. There are 2 reasons why we're doing this. First and foremost, it's going to make the outlining process so much easier. You know, you've picked out your concept, you've been doing your research, you should be starting to get some pretty interesting story and character ideas, and this is just going to help make them so much more concrete. The second reason is because of a not so surprising secret. Most people hate to read. And this is absolutely true of people in Hollywood whose job involves reading a lot of scripts. Part of that is because most scripts aren't actually that good. Getting someone to read a single page though and give you thoughts on that page is way easier than getting them to read a script. And unlike a logline, which is only 25 to 35 words, you've got a few hundred to work with here. That means you can communicate a whole lot more about the story. Writers use one-pagers to bounce things off writers, their reps, producers, execs, whatever. And for me, and for some other writers I know, they've become an instrumental part of our writing process. So do me a favor and open up a Google Doc, a Word doc, whatever you like, but something that will allow you to make a document that looks like this one. Take a second and actually open up that document. This is not just some video, it's a class, and having that document out as we go along is going to help you out a lot. Since examples are often more helpful when you see the actual movie, I wrote up a one-pager for Die Hard, and we're going to use that to help you build your own framework. The link to the actual document is in the description of this video, so feel free to download it if it'll help you follow along. In your own document, if you know the title already, write that in at the top. Otherwise, write in the word title. Write in your name below that. That title is your script's first impression, which means it's pretty important. So let's talk about titles for a second. Die Hard's title has a pretty cool story behind it. It was based on a book called Nothing Lasts Forever. They had a script that was in good shape, but the producer, Joel Silver, knew that they needed a stronger title if they were going to drive in audiences. Not only that, he knew exactly the title that he wanted, which was Die Hard. There was a problem though. Die Hard was already the title of another entirely different script. Not only that, it was a script written by Shane Black, one of the best-known, most successful screenwriters of all time. And that script, it was the script that became known as The Last Boy Scout, which was the script that had the highest sale price of all time, at least back then. Now, I don't know exactly how the title played into how much Shane got paid for it, but Joel Silver was also a producer on The Last Boy Scout, and he got Shane to give him the title Die Hard. And I would bet that it wasn't for nothing. Anyway, Die Hard became a classic that has stood the test of time, and it's inseparable from its title, and The Last Boy Scout unfortunately kind of bombed, but at least Shane Black got paid. The point of all this is, titles matter. They matter so much that producers will do things like that. Sometimes titles come really easily and just feel obvious. Sometimes they're brutally hard. Of every script I've written, Aftermath, the one that actually got made, was the hardest to find a title for. I tried a lot of different ideas, but could never really find anything better. So I settled on that as a working title because it at least kind of implied the tone and hinted at some of the backstory. And back in 2012, when I first wrote it, there weren't already several other movies with the same title. If you go check IMDb right now, you'll see a bunch of them. There was talk about changing the title when I was on set, and I actually got asked if I could come up with a bunch of new ideas sometime before we publicly announced the movie. So I came up with something like 50 of them, and I emailed them to the producers, and I figured they would pick one. And it was changed for a couple other countries and territories, but Aftermath is still the title that we have in the US. And it's an okay title, and it's not really a problem, but part of me wishes I'd kept working at it until I'd found something better. So as you write this script, it's something to keep in mind. Don't make the same mistake I did. Keep working at it. Find the right title for your movie. Once again, titles are your first impression, both for your audience and for your reader. Sometimes a title will pretty explicitly tell us what the movie's about, which can be great, but it doesn't have to do that in order to be effective. Die Hard says nothing about a cop or Hans Gruber and his henchmen or a skyscraper, so don't fall into the trap of feeling like that's a requirement. There are some things that you should consider though. Your title does need to fit your movie's tone and genre. Imagine for a second if Behind Enemy Lines and All Is Quiet on the Western Front swapped titles. They're both war movies, but the first has these action thriller vibes and the second is much more brooding. It really steeps you in the horror of war. Their titles fit what they are, and they wouldn't fit as well if it was the other way around. Titles set expectations, and if you betray those expectations, it can really backfire. So for instance, when Drive came out, people went to see this movie expecting to see a fast-paced action flick. I thought it was an incredible movie, but there were a lot of people who were disappointed, and despite some strong critical reception, it didn't have the success that it deserved. You should also consider sequel and franchise potential and whether that makes sense for your movie. Some movies are not meant to have sequels. That potential is a huge value add for a lot of genre movies though, and when that potential is there, it only helps that script's chances of getting made. We had a bunch of cool ideas for titles for Aftermath that included bridges or something bridge related in them, but we nixed all of those because if we do a sequel, it almost certainly won't be on a bridge and we don't want to box ourselves in. Aftermath 2, on the other hand, could be set anywhere. And by the way, if there is a sequel, my contract says that they have to hire me to write it, which gives me one more job to help keep this whole dream alive. And that's a pretty common thing when you sell a script. So writing things that could spawn sequels is not a bad career move. Next, your title should be evocative. Gerard Butler was in an action thriller that was released in theaters a couple years ago. It was called Plane, and it got eviscerated on social media because of its title. One-word titles can be awesome, but Plane was not one that stirred people's imaginations, at least not in a good way. It did pretty well. It seems to have made its money back after the worldwide receipts are taken into account, and it now even has similarly titled sequels in store. But simply because of its title, I wasn't planning to see it, and I know a lot of other people who felt the same way. I did end up catching it, and it was actually pretty solid, so I have to wonder if it could have done better if it had had a stronger title. The words you use matter, but often so do the number of words and syllables. If you're writing a snappy, high-concept movie, shorter can be better. 1 or 2 words, up to 3 or 4 syllables, that type of thing. If the movie is a little bit more artsy or thought-provoking or simply defies convention a bit, something a little more literary does a lot to set those expectations. So imagine if the Banshees of Inisherin had been called Inisherin or Banshees. That sounds like a completely different movie. Everything Everywhere All at Once was a title that told us to expect something different, and that's exactly what we got. When you're working with a noun for the title, even the word the tends to imply something. Often, I think it suggests a movie that will be slightly more elevated. Aftermath was written to be a gripping, in-your-face action movie. If I'd focused much more heavily on the PTSD element, I might have called it The Aftermath. If you imagine The Witch as Witch or Free Guy as The Free Guy, you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. Just to be clear, these are not rules. For the most part, they're just my own observations. So, give them some consideration, but take them with a large grain of salt. Again, nobody knows anything, and, exceptions are everywhere. At the end of the day, titles are not only the first opportunity that you have to set expectations about what the script will be, they're also the first opportunity you have to set expectations about you as a writer. So choose well. The next part of your one-pager is going to be the logline. So let's redefine that word one more time. A logline is 1 to 2 sentences to explain your concept in as few words as possible. Remember, you want to have all 4 of those elements in there. the setting or the scenario, the protagonist's goal, and the main antagonistic force. Go ahead and write the word logline a couple lines beneath your title and name. As long as you get your idea across in a way that's both crystal clear and enticing, there's no wrong way to structure a logline, but here are a couple structures that you can try and use that work really well in many cases. When the inciting incident happens, the protagonist must overcome the main antagonistic force in order to achieve the protagonist's goal. The inciting incident happens because of the main antagonistic force. Now it's up to the protagonist to achieve the protagonist's goal. Obviously, you're going to switch up many or all of the in-between words there to suit what it is that you're writing, but between those structures, you should be able to develop something like a good logline for your script. Remember that just like working with your title, tone is critical here, so be sure to use words that will reflect that. Although we do often include genre whenever we're pitching or using a logline, a reader should be able to infer that genre from the logline alone. So, using something like that first structure, here's how you might write a logline for Die Hard. When terrorists take over a towering skyscraper, an off-duty cop must leap into action to save himself, the hostages, and most importantly, his disaffected wife. If you find it challenging to write your loglines, that's okay. You're compressing an entire movie into 1 or 2 sentences, and that's not exactly easy. But it is something that you need to learn to do. When you're trying to break in, you'll need a great logline to include in any emails that you send. You'll want to know it in case you have a chance to pitch it verbally, and I think it really helps with the writing process itself. Okay, on to the body of the one-pager. Like I said, I like to approach them like a movie trailer. I give a clear sense of the genre, the setup, the tone, a few glimpses of some Act 2 highlights, and then I just get out. And by the time I think through one of these, I have a much more clear idea of what the movie wants to be, and that is a tremendous help when I begin outlining. So let's get into how to do that. Write the word opening below logline. This will likely represent a single paragraph, 2 at the most, but again, screenwriting is about economy and your goal is to get this all on one page, so aim for a single paragraph here. Try and figure out exactly what that first scene will be, and even better, what those first couple shots will be. The more that you can see the movie in your head, the more this process will help you. Your goal in this section is to establish your tone, your protagonist, and set up why the inciting incident is going to be a problem for them, and also why they're the most interesting possible character to face it. So in the Die Hard example, we open on a landing plane. Inside is John McClane, a wisecracking New York City cop who happens to hate flying. But he's got more to be anxious about than that. He's on his way to see his wife, Holly, for the first time in months. She moved to LA to chase her blossoming career, and thinking it wouldn't work out, John stayed behind. He's about to see firsthand how wrong he actually was. So we've got our opening image covered. We've spent a sentence describing who John is. We've set up his relationship with his wife and that it's not quite perfect. And we've set up that he chose to stay behind because he doubted her, which means that we've now clued our reader into his flaw. Your next paragraph is going to take us from that opening into what is often called the inciting incident or the catalyst. Think of this as the worst or best possible thing that could happen to your protagonist at this time. It turns their world upside down in one way or another, kicking off the movie. Although this is for you, feel free to make it punchy. I'll often take the defining sentence and center it in the middle of the page just to make it stand out. So below opening, write inciting incident. In Die Hard, John's going to have trouble patching things up with his wife if they're dead, but also there's a very clear emotional inciting incident when he discovers that Holly's changed her last name to Gennaro. Maybe it's a bit outdated, but we get it on a dramatic level. Things are even worse with his marriage than he thought, and it suggests, at least in his mind, that she's already moved on. So, John arrives at Holly's office, which is about 40 floors up in a brand new skyscraper, so new it's got floors that are still being renovated, but more on those later. Upon arriving, John discovers something that underscores how much things have changed. Holly has dropped the last name McClane. So we've now established the setting, including floors that aren't finished because they're suggestive of later set pieces, but more importantly, we've dropped a bomb on our protagonist. Now write in forcing the protagonist into action. If you already know it, you can write in your protagonist's name here too. This section represents the back half of the first act in our 3-act structure. Here, the protagonist often recognizes that something needs to be done, but they're not actually ready to do anything yet. When we move into our second act, we want our protagonists to be active and to decide to take action toward their goal. So this section is all about setting up that goal and forcing them to make that decision. In your one-pager, you're probably going to use 2 to 3 paragraphs here. For Die Hard, here's how I wrote it. This revelation spawns an argument, but as an executive, Holly needs to step away to make a speech to her employees, and John takes the moment to freshen up and cool off, realizing he was unfair and now intent on smoothing things over. Except unfortunately, that's when the terrorists strike. Half a dozen armed men, led by Hans, their brilliant suit-wearing boss, storm into the building and quickly take everyone hostage. Hearing gunshots, John manages to slip away into the CEO's office. Unfortunately, that's where Hans is headed too. John hides and listens as Hans brings the CEO into his office, questioning him and demanding a vault code that will give him access to $640 million in bearer bonds. And when the CEO doesn't give it up, Hans shoots him in the head. Okay, so we have just completely turned John's world upside down. We've underscored that this is life or death. We've set up the antagonist's motivation and ruthlessness, and before we did any of that, we took that inciting incident and made things a little worse by putting John and Holly in an argument and leaving it unresolved, with John knowing pretty damn well that he was wrong. So what are we going to do now? We're going to use a high-octane action movie to save John's marriage. We've got all sorts of stakes. It's not only sensible now, but critical for John to take action. We're more than halfway done here, so go ahead and write in moving into Act 2. When we break into Act 2, it's almost always because a protagonist has made a decision to take action toward their goal. This is true in almost every Hollywood movie, regardless of genre. In this case, John's goal is to find a way to rescue Holly and the hostages. This part of a script is also essentially where the protagonist moves into a new world. So Act 2 is where the concept of the movie can become really front and center. In an action movie like this, that means that this is where we begin to see some of the best action sequences and get a lot of our favorite one-liners. But again, this one-pager is supposed to feel like a movie trailer, so we don't need to reveal everything. We don't even want to yet. We simply want to convince our reader that this movie is going to be great. And so, realizing now that it's life or death not just for him, not just for everyone inside, but also for Holly, John escapes once again, takes out a terrorist, steals his radio and a machine gun, and starts putting together a plan. Whether it's fistfights or gunfights, whether it means leaping across an elevator shafts or off the building itself, whether it means detonating a massive block of C4, John's going to take these guys down and save his wife, or he's going to die hard trying. So we've got a very clear decision to act, with John's wife at the forefront of that goal. We get a hint of how he's going to get his feet on the ground by mentioning the radio and the gun, and we get a glimpse of what those set pieces might be. And that final paragraph, importantly, also sets the tone. This isn't something super dark and gritty like Taken. This thing is going to be action-packed for sure, but it's also going to be fun. Once again, this one-pager is about helping you begin to see the movie and build a foundation before you move into the outline. Most of what's on this page is the first act, and that's especially useful at this stage because the first act informs literally everything. It's often said that if you have third act issues, you don't really have third act issues, you actually have first act issues. You haven't set up your movie well enough. But the first act sets up far more than just the ending, it sets up everything. All of the dramatic tension that's going to hook us in and carry us through the movie, none of that works without a great first act. We'll talk more about the first act and every act in future classes, but hopefully this process helps you figure out the broad strokes and inspire a ton of other great ideas too. And when you do have great ideas, write them down as quickly as possible. Trust me, it's all too easy to forget those things. So now you have a basic framework in front of you to help create your own one-pager. What do you actually need to know to move forward though? Well, you're going to need to know your protagonist fairly well. You'll need to know their want, their need, their flaw, probably some backstory. You'll need to know where their arc should take them. You'll need a pretty good idea of what your ending should be because the point of the first act is to set all of that up. And you'll probably want a few basic ideas for Act 2, maybe some great trailer moments, major obstacles, things like that. This is a tough assignment, but it's going to be a huge help in terms of getting you off the ground. Also, I want you to challenge yourself to actually get it all on one page. That takes effort, but it's worth it. On the last one-pager I wrote for myself, I started out with 3.5 pages. I copied and pasted them into my Scratch doc so that I wouldn't lose any of those ideas, but then I worked and honed it until I got it down to a single page. When you do that, it really forces you to get to what the core of your story is, and it makes for a more shareable document. So that's one-pagers. If you got questions, leave a comment. I'll answer at least some of them here, and if you have a really great question, it might just become fodder for a future video. I would like to remind you of the cost of this course. You are paying yourself. This is an investment in you. Don't skip assignments. You've only got 10 more weeks, which isn't actually that long. And when you're done, you'll have one hell of a foundation. And remember, if you want to buy some delusional merch at the end, you got to earn it and do the work. Once again, the other cost of this course is to pay it forward. If you're getting some value out of it, share it with others. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't, because it costs you nothing and it boosts that old algorithm. So take 5 seconds and share the wealth with others. Okay, so assignments for week 5. The workload this week may feel a little bit hefty. It'll be closer to the 10-hour end of that spectrum, but there will be easier weeks coming up. First, write a one-pager for your script and share it with your group. Second, do at least 2 more hours of research and note-taking. Third, read a script for a movie that you know well and that is in the genre of your own script, and then rewatch the movie. Take notes on the structure and especially the first act. And one more thing, some of you, maybe most of you, are going to be tempted to start writing your scripts. Maybe some of you are doing it already. Do me a favor and stop. Trust the process. Don't start writing pages until it's time. We will get there soon, I promise. And if you truly find all of this upfront work unhelpful, you can always skip it on your next script. All right, I'll see you next week.